So today we're talking about Evolve, and it's been a while. It's been almost 10 years since the trailer for Evolve came out. And if you don't know what this is and you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, that's understandable because this launched with the original Xbox One and PS4, right? This had come out a couple of months after the holiday launch, and this game came out. They were showing all of these trailers. It was going to be like the next big thing, this huge hit, and then it survived maybe 6 months, and that was about it, which happens a lot nowadays, but this game, really flopped, and I want to break down why. I really never heard much about this game. I personally played it on launch, and many months after launch, and maybe even 2 or 3 years after the game had come out, but I'd never seen people really cover it, what happened, all that stuff, why the game really failed. So that's what I've been looking into over the past couple of days, and I found some stuff really interesting, so I just wanted to share with you guys what I found. So if you understandably don't know what Evolve is, it's a 1v4 hero shooter, where one player plays the monster, and the other 4 play the hunters. The monster is on the run, constantly trying to, based off the name of the game, evolve by eating things and getting power-ups and getting to higher stages, which give you more powerful abilities to then kill the hunters. The hunters are trying to quickly stop the monster from evolving and becoming practically unstoppable. Now, this is much like hero shooters, right? The game launched with 3 playable monsters and I believe 4 playable hunters, 1 for each class, and it would release with DLC and different monsters and different characters later on, and we'll get to that in a minute. But essentially, this was the beginning of your hero shooters. I was looking at it, and it's hard to believe, but this is pre-Rainbow Six Siege, this is pre-Overwatch. Even trying to flip the gear and not use a shooter, For Honor uses the same style of mechanic. It's melee based and not a shooter, but it still uses that hero system of each having their own unique abilities that interact with each other, and this is before all of those types of games. So this is one of the real first ones to do that. And so let me break down the gameplay a little bit more so you understand when we get to the problems, why it was so much of a problem. So each hunter has unique classes and unique abilities. Now, is there anything crazy? You have, a trapper that would cage the monster in and put a bubble down, keeping them in a specific area. You have the assault that just does a lot of damage, the healer, the scout, or the recon, right? These are typical classes that have what you would expect, typical abilities that use things to trap and slow down and find the monster. Now, the monsters were more unique. You had your Goliath, which was relatively fairly well balanced, your starting character, if you will, then the Kraken, which was more ranged and an aerial type monster, and then the Wraith, which was all about stealth and surprising and taking out the group of hunters one by one. And they had unique abilities, and you would hunt prey and use those abilities to hunt the prey and unlock different abilities to get you even stronger, and then eventually you would be so strong that the hunters wouldn't be able to stop you. They had things like birds in the environment you could interact with that would let the hunters know where the monster is, so you have to be careful of that. And you would constantly be trying to run from the hunters while evolving at the same time to be able to kill them. As the hunters, you're doing the exact opposite. You want the game to end as soon as possible. You're trying to find this monster and kill it before it's completely unstoppable. Now, the immediate problems with this gameplay loop. Number 1, if the hunters are absolutely insane, the game is super short, and if the monster is absolutely insane, the game is also super short. Now, this can be said for a lot of types of games, like Rainbow Six Siege, Overwatch, same games, the same type of genre, so it works the same way, really. That's not really a primary complaint, that's just something I wanted to bring up. The big, again, obvious problem is with this hero shooter type game, you have to have a team. Right? If you're playing Overwatch, you're not playing something where you're locking in roles and you have no healer, you're absolutely fucked. If your tank sucks, you're absolutely fucked. Same thing in this game with the hunters. Again, if you want a super meta comparison, you're playing on Garage, on Chalet, and your bandit trick just got killed or failed or did something stupid and now through Garage, you're absolutely fucked on that plant. Here, if you're do massive damage to the monster and your support's keeping you at high health and you're doing a lot of damage, not letting it get away and constantly tracking it and staying on the monster so it won't evolve, but your trapper isn't keeping it hunkered down and keeping it within your range and constantly letting it get away, that does nothing for you. You just can't win. So you have to have 4 people who are really good at the game, or at least somewhat coordinated. And so when you look at something like Siege or Overwatch or any of these games, you have an example of For Honor, Samurai versus Samurai. You have your operators in Rainbow. You know, they each do different things, but they all relatively have guns that are relatively balanced, and their abilities aren't incredibly different. Even if you look at something like Apex Legends, a battle royale where you have abilities, none of them are to the point where you're so overpowering the other and you need your squad mates to have X and Y abilities in order to win a fight, period. Here, because the monster is so strong and so overpowering against the hunters, all 4 of you have to work together very well. And this is very hard to balance when you haven't seen this type of thing before. Now, along with the hunter versus monster mechanic, you have the map itself. This is the first time where they used that term of a living world, and I've actually seen it. Even to this day, this is really one of the best map environments for a multiplayer game that I've ever seen. Right, so all of the maps have your typical wildlife on it that the monster has to hunt in order to eat and survive, but it also has alphas that it can eat to evolve even quicker, and can also kill the hunters if they're not careful. Wildlife, like the fly traps, you know, huge, and they will trap a hunter and kill them if their teammates don't save them. Or you have, on the inverse side, the alphas, like I was saying, the monster needs to eat in order to level up very quickly. Well, if you catch the monster trying to eat one, you can now pin the monster between your group of hunters and that alpha, so it's now fighting multiple groups of enemies once. So the world was actually something that I think worked relatively well. But let me get into this article where they talk about the balancing of the game and how that was so difficult for the time and all of that stuff. So one of the first things they talk about is kind of role-playing the game itself when playtesting it. And so I completely understand this idea, because when you're playing something, again, not the same genre, but Ghost Recon Wildlands or Breakpoint, right? If you role-play the role that you're playing, kind of this lone agent trying to take down the whole country and going through and stealth fighting the whole bases so that you're undetected, right? That's cool and all, and like that's a lot of fun. But you can just run around and shoot everybody, right? You can just sprint around like it's Call of Duty. The same thing goes here, right? If you roleplay tracking the monster and actually going after it and using the clues that they give you and using, you know, the on-paper intended sources to go ahead and fight the monster, or as the monster fight the hunters, that's fine. It sounds like a really fun idea. But when you're playing to win, you don't do that. You're going to use whatever strategy works best, right? And as the monster just constantly running away until you hit stage 3 is the thing to do. And unless their trapper's really good, it's not that hard. You just run and run and run. You maybe pick off one of them and do some damage here and there, but you can just constantly run away. And again, unless they're relatively halfway decent, you can get away relatively easily depending on which monster you're playing. Now, the same goes for the hunters, right? On certain maps, once you play the game long enough, you know kind of the hot spots as to where the monster's going to go, the points of interest they're going to hit, and you can kind of go ahead and go ahead of them and catch up to the monster and just be waiting for them, essentially, and never let them evolve and just speed run through the gameplay. And so that was one of the first problems that the game had, is that if you're not playing the way that the game was intended, you can absolutely break it. Now, I'm about to just hit you with an absolute wall of text, and like I said, I'm going to link the article for this down in the description if you want to go ahead and read through this. But this is, to me, if you want the summarized version of the absolute book I just put on screen, essentially evolve Dolphin Dived off the top floor so that Rainbow Six Siege and Overwatch and games like that could run, right? And so essentially what this breaks down to is that because, like I said earlier, they're all so mechanically different and dependent on each other, it's so hard to balance that. Again, going back to Rainbow Six Siege, because that's what I have the most experience with. If you have a bad bandit who's not reinforcing the walls and keeping the enemies out, that's fine. You have Cade, you have Mute, you have Azami, you have frickin' Aruni, you have, you know, all of these other operators that you can use that don't do exactly the same thing, but relatively have the same playstyle, right? And as the game went on and they added more characters, they added some changes that helped with that, with different trappers that weren't entirely trapping based and could also do damage, and assault characters that had the capability to trap just the tiniest bit so that you weren't entirely reliant on each individual character, but it still remained a problem. It was a core gameplay mechanic that they just couldn't change. Now, to stop this from being a 40-minute video, that's enough about the gameplay, which I know is a big part of the game, but the business part of this game is also a reason that it failed, so let me talk about that. The game was huge on cosmetics, right? And if you look at something like, for example, 2 games that I've installed recently, just for reference, The Witcher 3 and this. When I installed The Witcher 3, when you install a game on Xbox, it gives you a queue of how many things you're actually installing the game plus all of the add-ons. I have not the Ultimate Deluxe Edition, but one of the bigger editions of The Witcher. I had 17 things in my queue. But this is a story game where each and every single one of those things was essentially free to the version that I was in, and don't drastically change the game that much, and again, were free. With Evolve, same thing. I installed the game, I had like 19 things in my queue, and it's like every single monster in red, every single gun in red. And so that would be fine again because I have a higher up edition of the game and that was all free if it stopped there. But this is where you get your 2K Activision style Madden microtransactions. This is where it really started, right? You get $20 for blue, $20 for orange, $20 for pink, $20 for green, and I'm not talking monster skins or like different Overwatch variation skins where like, oh, you can like look like the Hulk as this monster or stuff. No, this is to change the color of your gun. It's not even anything cool like Call of Duty where like you can be Tim the Tap Man and body slam people and like tacos fall out of them. At least that, like, I'll laugh every time I kill somebody. No, you're literally red. That's it. So this was an absolute huge problem, number 1. Number 2, again, games as a service being relatively new, they try to keep things updated and trying to constantly keep the game new and fresh. A couple months after release, they release a new monster, along with some new hunters, and while the new hunters, like I said, have some new abilities here and there, they're relatively doing the same thing, but the monsters, the more unique ones. You have the Goliath, like I said, that's the tank, the Kraken, that's the air range, the Wraith, that's stealth, but then they had the Behemoth, right? And the Behemoth is a tank, and it makes sense, like you're like, okay, absolutely no problem, there's a tank in the game, Overwatch has a tank, don't see what the problem is. So, when you have a tank in Overwatch, just, you know, to use a comparative example, you have Hanzo with 200 health, and then Sigma with, well, like 600, or if you want to go to the extreme, Reinhardt has like a little bit more than that, like 800 or something like that. I don't know, I don't play that much Overwatch. The monster has like 5,000 health, and the hunters have like 200. Then you add this tank that has like 50,000 health, and the hunters have like 500. And so you see what the problem is. Because by the time you got to even stage 2, this guy was insane. He just put up a big rock wall, he could turn it like a cannonball and like roll over you. He was just broken. So their first update to try to fix the game and add some new life to it absolutely breaks the game. And then it doesn't help that the game modes in this game sucked. They basically, if you look at something like Call of Duty, right, like your team deathmatch, your domination, free-for-all, search and destroy, those are really your big ones, right? Maybe like your party match style games, like Gun Game, One in the Chamber, all that type of stuff. But then you have like the weird ones like Uplink and you know, the weirder game modes in Call of Duty that you play from time to time, but nobody really plays those game modes. Well, this game, it was the same thing. You had your hunt mode, and everything else kind of sucked, like protect the egg mode, and all types of other modes that just weren't good. It was really just the one mode that was decent. And then they added Arena later on, which was just a quick play version of the hunt mode. So really, it didn't have a lot of variation, and when they finally got to adding variation, it completely broke the game. So what's my thesis, right? I say all this shit for 15 minutes. Why did Evolve fail? Well, simply, they tried to do way too much wrote it all down on paper, and then got to testing it, and they're like, oh no. And then the game kind of just came out anyways, right? It's so trying to over-deliver on the concept that hadn't been done yet. They kind of skipped the first step, right? They skipped the Rainbow Six Sieges, the Overwatch, where all the characters, the Valorants even, they're kind of the same and do the same thing, and the core mechanic is the same, and then you just have a little bit of variation, and they tried to make everything and everyone unique, right? Which now, this is done now, 10 years later, we have all this experience, balancing like 56 fucking operators in the same game. Maybe you can do that. But here, 10 years ago, they weren't ready. That and, microtransactions, because you can't make a game without those. But mainly the first thing. But I just was thinking about Evolve, always wanted to make an Evolve video. So now that this is out there, you guys let me know. Did you like Evolve? Did you hate Evolve? You know what Evolve is? Do you agree with my conclusion, or do you think the game's still alive? I mean, the servers are down, so it's not. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you on the next one.